Let's talk a little more about the nation that sits right outside the walls of Babylon while Belshazzar parties. Let's talk about the Persian Empire. We'll give you a little bit of background about what the Persian Empire is, where it came from, who is involved, and we are now looking at, if you remember Nebuchadnezzar's statue, we are looking at the second empire that's represented there. The empire of the Persians was bigger than the empire of Babylon. Each of the succeeding empires in Daniel's prophecy and Nebuchadnezzar's statue, each of them is a little bigger, a little more far-reaching, but Persia was incredible. Look, you're reaching over into Macedonia and Thrace, over toward what will become Greece. You are down into Egypt and way down the Nile, and you are far east, all the way over to areas next to India and Bactria. So the Persian Empire is huge. We're going to talk a little bit about how in the world they were able to hold such a vast empire together. So this is the Persian Empire, and you can see pretty much where it sits. It's the Fertile Crescent, and then down into Egypt, and over into Asia Minor, and then east past the Caspian Sea, all the way over to the borders of India. Some of the developments that made Persia a formidable enemy was in ships. They learned how to move horses and cavalry, and putting them on ships and getting them safely to where you're going, so that you can have those horses in battle and you can have them much more quickly than having to go by land. They also invented a kind of pontoon bridge that allowed them to cross water with much more speed. You could take your whole army across as a result of these pontoon bridges that they developed. One of the things that really gave them a hand was their post roads and government stations. They invented the Pony Express, let's say. They could move messages because of these government outposts all throughout their empire. They could move messages from one place to another by Pony Express across vast areas very quickly. And so you could ride to the next government station, switch horses, a new rider, same message, rides on, and you could get messages much more quickly than anybody had created in times past, which gave you a real advantage militarily, because if you could move messages that fast, you could launch a multi-prong attack. You could coordinate armies to be on both sides of the enemy to move in and crush your opposition. So that was a huge advantage, to be able to move messages quickly. And this organization of putting together government stations in all parts of the empire and developing these post roads made communication a huge advantage for the Persians. The Persians were also multicultural, so they had a lot of connections to a lot of different peoples who could provide military assistance on occasion. In fact, for Persia, they had to be multicultural. Only 1 in 25 people in the Persian Empire was actually Persian. And so some Persian kings were willing to give out gold coins to Persian mothers who had children to try to keep the ethnic Persian line going in the midst of their empire. They were also multicultural in the fact that they had no overarching legal system or law code. They had a real tolerance for whatever the local gods were, whatever the local customs were, and then if they were good and advantageous, they assumed it into their empire. So in that sense, they were a good multicultural governmental system. This is the Persian Empire broke up according to its satrapies, and you can see what land was held when, And your Persian capitals, you can see those in the middle. They are Babylon, Ecbatana, Susa, Pasargadae, Persepolis, and can't read that one, Borazim. So the ones for our discussion will be, of course, Babylon and Susa. So what happened in these capitals is the king would move in a circuit from one to the next. And so there was not just one capital, there were 5. And they moved from one to the next along the way. So the capitals were Babylon, Persepolis, Susa, Ecbatana, and Pasargadae. There are 5 of them. Sorry about that. And then the government of Persia was stable. The kings were able to control, and not so much military, but they in their administration, it was a stable government. If we said that David of David and Goliath fame would regard his role as king as a shepherd king, using the picture of a shepherd to say this is what a king is like, for Persia, the image of what the ideal king would be like would be a gardener king. In other words, somebody who was able to plant and grow to harvest an abundance of wealth and blessing and prosperity for his people. In fact, their idea of gardens gave us our word paradiso, or paradise. So in their capitals especially, they would have huge gardens, lush vegetation, in order to display what a good king would do. But they also had a sense that when you needed to make an important decision, a lot of drinking should be involved. Now, you and I might think the opposite should be true, but in their case, they believed drinking and decision-making went together. They were a moral people. They had a code of conduct, as you can see in a minute. And we also showed you from the last slide where those satrapies were, divided empire. The picture here is the tomb of Cyrus, and it is still there, and you can go see it. This is the founder, Cyrus, and actually there's an inscription that is there, and it reads this way: "O man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, for I know that you will come, I am Cyrus, son of Cambyses, who founded the empire of the Persians and was king of the East. Do not begrudge me this spot of earth, which covers my body." Isn't that interesting? This is the founder, Cyrus. From then on, in order to identify with the reign of Cyrus, each succeeding king would have to go to Cyrus' tomb, put on Cyrus clothes, eat Cyrus food, and think through what it would have been like to be that first ruler. Such was the respect that Persia had for its founding emperor. Darius was next, and you read about him in Scripture as well. So we have Cyrus, mentioned in Scripture in Isaiah by name before he's king as the one who would invade. And then we have Darius, and he is in the Achaemenid family line. We'll talk about that in a minute, of Cyrus and the Persian emperors. He created the administration, the Imperial System. I mentioned that they were a moral people. He is quoted as saying, "I am moral, both in strong in both mind and body, self-controlled and courageous." One of the things he did to hold that vast empire together is wherever they went, wherever they held land and territory, he would recruit faithful multilingual secretaries. So whenever he needed to send out a message, these secretaries would all be around him, and they would immediately translate what his decree was, and they would translate it into the language of the people from their home, and then it would be put on that Pony Express system, and those messages would go out quickly to all ends of the empire. So he had a way of communicating in many different languages to all of the people that resided in his empire. That's pretty incredible. So this is the burial spot of Darius, also there in very near where Cyrus' tomb is as well. Here's the Achaemenid dynasty. Starts with Cyrus, and you notice that what I read earlier said Cyrus, son of Cambyses. Well, I'm putting here, and it says Cyrus is first and then Cambyses. One of the problems that we have with Achaemenid dynasty is that they love the names, and to show respect, they use them again. So there are more than one Cyrus, more than one Cambyses. Do you see the problem of trying to put them in order? So this Cambyses is grandson of the Cambyses who gave birth to Cyrus. Do you see my problem? So Cyrus, Cambyses, Darius, Xerxes, then Artaxerxes, and Cyrus. And there's going to be a little conflict that arises in the Achaemenid dynasty at that time. So there you are. The different kings that all will play a part at one time or another during the captivity of Israel and its return. The Persians believed the religion of the Achaemenids was Ahuramazda, the creator god. And he is pictured here on this stone. You can kind of see him with wings. He's riding around on his sort of flying chariot there, or flying sun. You can see the wings, the tail feathers. You can see Ahuramazda sitting above it and just hovering. And if we were to back out, as we'll see the picture in a minute, you'll see Ahuramazda sovereignly overseeing all the affairs of the king of Persia. It's interesting that Ahuramazda returns to prominence during the time of Esther. And so, wondering about that, they also believed in Zarathustra, and that's the religion that dates clear back to, say, around 1000 BC. These will be important later, I don't know, like at the birth of Christ, but they had Magi, who were priests and political advisors, people of wisdom, people of ethics, and so they played a large role in both the religion and the administration of Persia. The king and the priests would offer earth and water as a sacrifice. And there's one time in which certain places in the empire, during a certain time in the Persian Empire, you could find a popular Egyptian god. And you would find him in all places in the empire where there seemed to have been no Egyptian influence. And it appears that the Persians, if they found a good god, if they found a god that became popular, they were willing to pull that into their religious system as well. So we find an Egyptian god at many different places around the Persian Empire. We call that syncretism. But it also shows that when we read scripture and we see the emperor allowing the Jews to return, or finding out that indeed there had been a decree by Cyrus to return, that he makes a statement that you do not stand in the way of the God who is worshipped in Jerusalem. So it's an interesting way in which they viewed religion as well. Here's that relief in greater detail. You can come back, you can see all of the people who are showing allegiance to the king, and Ahuramazda is above, overseeing and protecting. We know about Persian information mainly from Greek sources. Now there's a problem with that because the Greeks were the enemies. If you've seen 300 or you've heard of the Battle of Thermopylae and others, then you know that Greece and Persia did not get along. And so if you're reading a Greek source and you're reading about the Persians, remember that you're reading the enemy. You're reading, not getting maybe a proper perspective of what Persia was really like. You're getting the description of the enemy when you read Greek sources. There's also a Byzantine inscription that gives us information. We have found tablets at one of those capitals, Persepolis, and so we are learning information about the Persians from there. And a good source for learning about the Persians is reading about them in Scripture itself. They had an interesting way of pulling the East and the West together. And so those are things that are sources for us as we try to put together our understanding of the Persian world. We mentioned already those post roads and the Imperial System, their sense of abundance, the palaces that they would build with the great gardens, the paradisos, the banquets that they would hold in order that there might be a display of the abundance. The king looks good, the emperor looks good when he is able to provide abundance. See, it's not military strength as much as being able to provide lavishly for the people who are under his care. Demands military strength, but is much more than that. So you notice in that Nebuchadnezzar statue that we talked about, we go from Babylon to Persia, and there is a degrading. There's an increase in military strength, but there's a degrading in the wealth and the prosperity and the abundance that comes with those kingdoms. Banquets, when they held them, were not about quantity. I'm sorry. Boy, I can't type on this one. We're not about quantity, but about quality. So the banquets were to be enjoyed for the kinds of foods that better, richer than you had perhaps had wherever you traveled from. Banquets were also a test of restraint. So the king and others would be watching as they display this wonderful, salivating food in front of you, food that you have never seen before, food that makes you excited. But if you could eat sparingly, if you could try things and you showed a character that was restrained, then they knew that you would also have that kind of character when it became necessary, as in faithfulness to the king. So that's the Persian ideas that will show up when Xerxes throws a banquet in Esther. So they are showing the abundance of the king. Perhaps the king is getting ready to go to war, perhaps against the Greeks, and so he wants to show his people what a great, lavish king he is to provide this kind of banquet for such a long time, and also to test those men who would go to battle with him and to see whether or not they will be able to stand the test. So there are many different passages we could go to. We've already talked about in another video Daniel's visions, both Nebuchadnezzar's statue and then the four beasts and then the ram and the goat. Each of these are succeeding empires that are going to be very important for us for the remainder of this course. Then we have the story of Esther and Xerxes, and how Xerxes is putting together yet another military campaign against the Greeks. And so when Vashti defies his authority, it puts a major dent in what he's trying to accomplish in getting unity together to go to war against the Greeks again. Then we have Cyrus' decree, in which he allows the Jews, just as Isaiah had predicted, to return to rebuild their temple. And so we have that. And it actually reads like this. I'm reading from 2 Chronicles 36. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the nations of the earth, and has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up. So there's the release. We talked about the 70-year period of captivity, and here Cyrus is releasing them. He has defeated Babylon, and now he is the empire in control, and he's giving permission for God's people to return to Jerusalem, to build a temple, to restore worship to the God of Israel. Notice there's a significant influence that God has made on Cyrus, insomuch as he has allowed them to return. And in fact, one of the emperors will one day say, we want to restore the worship in Jerusalem so that prayers could be made for me and for my sons. It's a pretty incredible thing. So that's a little bit of a look at Persia. We'll look at it again when we look at Esther. And you might want to review the video on the 4 kingdoms that are coming. So thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon.